Hey, my name is Justin Dewell, and welcome to the Branching Out podcast. We've been going through how the Bible begins and ends, and this is our final episode in season 1. So we've gone a little bit through the book of Genesis and kind of looked over the big picture in the book of Revelation. And so on this episode, we're going to look at the very end of Revelation, chapters 21 and 22. So I just want to read a little bit of chapter 21 as we get started here, just to help us get into it a little bit. So here's what John writes and in Revelation chapter 21, starting with verse 1. He says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.' He who was seated on the throne said, 'I am making everything new.' Then he said, 'Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.' He said to me, 'It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death.'" So as John opens this vision, as he's done throughout the book of Revelation, he's going to use images to communicate to us that this is what heaven's like, except it is even more than this. It is much more than I can even describe to you, because it's greater. I don't have the words for it. I don't have the images or the language for it. And so John is going to do everything he can to try and help us understand what's going on, even though he won't always have the best words for it, but he's going to do everything that he can. And so this, new heaven and a new earth, this is a whole new way of living. It's a completely different way. This is not like buying a new car. This is like something new that changes everything. It's more like getting married or, having your first child. It's something like that, where everything is now new. Everything we used to do, the way we used to do things, that's not going to work anymore. All the rules have changed. And so that's a little bit of what John is getting at with this new heaven and a new earth. All the rules are going to be different. And in fact, in just these couple of chapters, we have a few places where we see that. So, what I just read, there's not going to be any more death or mourning or crying or pain. So these things that we're all very used to, we all expect, these are the rules of life. That's all gone. So no more of that. That's first what we get. Later in chapter 22, John's going to tell us that the city, God's new city, isn't going to need the sun or the moon to provide light, because God will be the light. People aren't going to need lamps to get around. So for us, it's like you're not going to need to get out a flashlight or use a flashlight on your phone to see. God will be the light. Another rule change is that the city, this new city of Jerusalem, will not ever have to shut its gates. It's never going to have to close its gates, because it won't be nighttime. And for us, that's a little different, because our cities don't have gates here in America in the 21st century. But back then, cities had walls and gates as defensive structures, and you would close the gates at nighttime to protect the city, but you would also close the gates if there was danger. So if there was like an enemy army coming by, or some kind of group of raiders or some trouble, you could close up the gates to protect people inside. So not only will it never be nighttime, but there's also never going to be any kind of danger or threat to where God's new city will need to seal up the gates to keep us safe. We'll always be safe. And then we also read there's no longer going to be any curse. So the rules have changed. That echoes us back to Genesis chapter 3, where because of sin, there's now this curse in the world. But when the new heaven and the new earth come, there will no longer be any curse. So all the rules that you and I live with today are going to be different. It's going to change everything. And one more rule that's going to change is we will get to see God face to face. That is something that people haven't been able to do. And throughout the Old Testament, the warning is, if you see the face of God, you will die. But now we'll get to see God face to face without any fear of death or some kind of crazy occurrence happening because we can't handle God's holiness. We'll be with him. He'll be present with us. And this image that John gives us, it's this image of not so much us going up to heaven. Sometimes we think about that like, the old hymn, I'll fly away. It's like, well, we really won't fly away up into heaven. And even the image isn't quite exactly that Jesus comes down. It's that there's a city coming down. This new city, this new Jerusalem is what comes down to us, and God then will dwell with us. He's going to finally live amongst us. So this connects with, what we call the incarnation, which is that God put on flesh in Jesus and came to our world. And Jesus lived a lot like us. And so that same sense of the incarnation happens in the end of Revelation, which is the end of time, where God will finally, in that incarnational sense, he's going to move into our neighborhood. He's going to build a house right on the same street with us and be our neighbor and live there, which is always what he wanted to do. But now he's finally going to get to do that. And so this is the image we get. But also notice, just even in just the first couple of verses there, that what we see is there's a new heaven and a new earth. So it's not just like God throws away the earth and we just all go to heaven, but there's also going to be a new heaven, which sort of seems to think that there's the people who've died already as Christians, they're in heaven, but they're not in the new heaven yet, which means there's even going to be a version of heaven that's better than the heaven that exists right now, which is mind-boggling to think about, because we typically think as Christians, heaven is the greatest place ever. That's where we want to be. But even Revelation sets us up for, actually, there's something better than heaven. There's a new heaven and a new earth, and it's a combination. It's in Jesus. God is going to transform the whole universe, and this new heaven and a new earth are going to somehow come together and coexist and be together. So this is pretty just powerful, rule-changing, life-changing, universe-altering kind of stuff. And again, John's trying his best to give us the images, but he doesn't quite have all the right words for this. And so he's doing his best, but he doesn't quite have the right language. And so he's doing the best he can with images and symbols to get us there. And very quickly, we even are told that there's no longer any sea, which seems like an odd statement to make. But if you remember when we talked about early in Revelation chapter 4, sea, the ocean in the first century, was viewed as this place where there is chaos and evil. And so no more sea means no more chaos, no more evil. It's gone, wiped out forever. So the rules are changing. The things we just expect in life won't be there anymore in the new heaven and the new earth. Now, something else we want to think about with these is these images and these symbols is our own picture of heaven. I just know for me, I've heard a lot of very uninspiring ideas and pictures of heaven that don't exactly make me all that thrilled to get there, Matt Proctor, who's the president of Ozark Christian College, which is where I went to school, he one time in a sermon described kind of what he had heard about heaven as like you go through the pearly gates and you're handed a choir robe and a hymnal and you join the heavenly choir. And the choir director says, all right, open your hymnal to hymn number 1. We're going to sing all 4 verses. We're not going to skip any of it. And then you just go through the hymnal, one hymn at a time. And when you get to the end, you flip back to the beginning and you start all over again. And that's heaven. And it's kind of like, well, if that's the image you hear, and this was Matt's point, it's like, it doesn't sound all that exciting to go to heaven. Like, really, we're just going to sing through the hymnal forever? Doesn't sound that exciting. And sometimes we have these images of heaven where, we're going to get a white robe and we're going to get some wings and float around on clouds. And that doesn't sound all that exciting either. But yet the biblical picture of heaven is a lot less of our sort of cartoon, kind of Hallmark card imagined heaven. It is a heaven that is much like the earth we have right now. It's a new heaven. And so there's still going to be this beauty and this wonder and this splendor of creation that we have now, but it will be repaired. It will be transformed. And so for me, I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if when we get to the new heaven and the new earth, if a lot of our geography that we have right now is there. Like, I would not be shocked if the new earth kind of looks a lot like this one, and we still have the Grand Canyon and the Rocky Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains and all the same oceans. And it might be like those of you who've always wanted to visit the Himalayas. In the new heaven and new earth, maybe you get to go to the Himalayas. And the difference will be we still have all the beauty of creation, but now we have it without the curse of sin. So the way that things weren't supposed to work, that's been removed and it's been repaired and transformed, and now it's the way it's supposed to be. And so heaven is more concrete. It's better than this abstract idea of, we're just going to float around on the clouds. In fact, we might still have work to do, because if we go back to Genesis, God gave Adam and Eve work before the fall. The fall made work harder than it was supposed to be, but there was still work. So in fact, in heaven, we still may have jobs and things to do, but it will be truly fulfilling and joyful work without the way that sin has made work hard and difficult and confusing and stressful. It'll be so much better. And so John continues to tell us all about how much greater this image of heaven is, and he just continues to stretch the images. Then in chapter 22, an angel takes John and shows him the new city and gets out a measuring rod and measures it. So it's like an old school tape measure in the ancient world. And he measures it and describes the city. And of course, the description is wonderful. We hear about there's 12 gates, and they're made out of a pearl, and there's all these, really nice gemstones that are used to decorate the city, and it's really big. In fact, the square footage of the city of the New Jerusalem that's described in chapter 22, it is almost about the same square footage of the Roman Empire at that time. Or I guess square mileage would be the better way to put it. So it's like you have a city that's described almost as the size of the Roman Empire in that day. And yet it is the exact same distance wide as it is tall. It's a perfect cube. So, if we were to very literally take this, what John is seeing is a city, a massive city that, you think about, it fills up like modern day Italy, parts of Europe down into sort of Turkey, into Egypt. This huge Roman Empire. And yet it's imagine just a big box sitting on like a big chunk of the planet over by the Middle East. You would think that's pretty crazy. That's weird. But part of what John is ascribing to us, it's not so much about the literal dimensions. It's the fact that it is a perfect cube. And in the temple that is in Jerusalem, the place called the Holy of Holies, which was the middlemost point in the temple, that is where the Ark of the Covenant went. That is where it was said that God's presence lived. That space was also a perfect cube, which meant it is the same dimensions, the room dimensions, length, width, and height. So they're all the same dimensions. And so what you have in chapter 22 and 21 is this description of a city, this new city that's described an awful lot like the temple and the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. In fact, a lot of the sacred items that God instructed the Israelites to create for worship, those instructions are all kind of folded in on themselves in the description of the New Jerusalem. Even the gems that are used to talk about the city, those are the gemstones that are used in the high priest's garment. He wore like this special breastplate with 12 stones, and all the stones stood for the different tribes of Israel. And those are the same gemstones in the description of this new city of Jerusalem. Plus, you've got 12 gates with the name of the apostles on it and the names of the 12 tribes. So what you have is the city is described with elements of the place where God's presence lived in the Old Testament, combined with the language of identity of his people, like the tribes and the disciples. And it just sort of all of it folds together in this way to really communicate this is finally going to be the place where God lives. It will be his home, and we will get to be right there with him. And it's so big that the dimensions are just unfathomable. I mean, because we live in an era where we've discovered the whole world, and so we can kind of look at a map and you can see that part of the world. I mean, at that time, the Roman Empire was the world. That's all they knew. So it's like, John describes the new city, the new heavens and the new earth as a place bigger than the current earth, right? So the exact dimensions are not really the point. The point is he's trying to get us to think this place is grander, it's bigger, it's beyond anything else I know how to describe to you. Our world map is, almost too small for this place. It's incredible. And again, the rules are going to all change when the new heaven and the new earth comes. And this is part of what it's going to look like. And so what we see is this new city is finally the place where God's presence is no longer restricted. It's no longer restricted to, the tent of meeting or the tabernacle or the Ark of the Covenant or the temple. It's everywhere. We'll get to see him face to face. And so after all these descriptions of this new heaven and the new earth, what John ends with, what Revelation ends with, is a call to worship. Because after all of this happens, this angel who is there as a messenger to help relay this to John, again, like he does at the very beginning of the book, if you remember chapter 1, there's an angel there who's going to be a messenger, and John kind of collapses it and begins to worship him, and the angel says, no, don't worship me, get up. Same thing happens here at the end of the letter. John falls down to worship, and the angel says, no, get up and worship the Lord. Don't worship me, worship the Lord. And so as we finish up the end of the Bible, particularly the book of Revelation, this is a book about worship. It is not so much about, how exactly will the world end and what do we need to be looking for? It's more about who are you going to worship? Because if you worship the Lamb, this is what you can expect. You can expect you will get in trouble if you worship the Lamb. But you can also expect you will be made pure and white and blameless, and you will be given eternal life and this new city with God if you worship the Lamb. But if you worship the beast and his minions, then you will deserve death. You will get, the lake of burning sulfur. You will not be allowed in God's city. And so the book ends with this final call to worship the Lord. But it also ends with a very important call to identity and action, and even action that comes out of your identity. Let me read here kind of the end of chapter 22. There's this little part here. This is verse 10 and 11. The angel tells John, "Do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this scroll, because the time is near. Let the one who does wrong," listen to this, "continue to do wrong. Let the vile person continue to be vile. Let the one who does right continue to do right. And let the holy person continue to be holy." So at the end, there's this call to persevere based on your identity. There's this final call to say, for those of us who are Christians, continue to do what is right and continue to be holy, no matter what you face, no matter what the world says, no matter how easy or hard it is to do what is right and to be holy. Keep being holy and do what is right. And that comes straight out of our identity. Because as children of God, that's who we are. We are holy. We're meant to do what is right. We're not pretending. It's really who we are. And on the flip side, the angel tells John, hey, let those who continue to do wrong, let those who continue to be vile, let them keep acting that way. Because if they act that way, they will get what they deserve. They will finally get the wrath and the justice of God because of their own pride, their own behavior, which comes out of their identity somewhere. They'll finally get what they deserve too. And that's what he ends with. So as we kind of finish up the book of Revelation, but just how the Bible begins and ends, it's really interesting to look at how just the parallels of how the Bible began. The Bible began with everything the way it's supposed to be. And then we chose to sin, and that damaged the way that God created the world. So the Bible begins with creation being damaged and humanity leaving the garden. But the Bible ends with creation being transformed and restored. And the Bible ends with us not being forced away from God, but being drawn back to him, being brought into his city and him living with us. The Bible begins with this crafty serpent lying and trying to convince us to do what is wrong, what is not holy. And so we get to the end of the Bible, and there is no more crafty serpent. There is no more liars. They're not allowed in heaven. And so there's no more misinformation. There's no more lies. There's no more shame. In fact, one of the things I've learned to do, another kind of mentor pastor of mine taught me about this. He does something called a no more list, where he keeps just a list of all the things that will be no more in heaven. So, there's so many things you could put on this list. And what he's done is he's just throughout the years added to it. And so I'd encourage you, a great way to just kind of put Revelation into practice is make your own no more list. Just make your own no more list. So you might put on there like no more cancer, no more surprise medical bills, no more divorce, no more manipulation, no more car accidents, no more bullies, no more abuse, no more arguments, no more shame, no more war, no more dictators, no more flat tires in the rain, no more, whatever. You could just go on and on and on. In fact, you might even put on there, no more body odor, or no more bad breath, or no more unhealthy junk food that makes you gain weight, or bad calories, or bad carbs, or whatever. No more broken air conditioners. I mean, these can be as serious as no more cancer, and they can even be kind of lighthearted, like no more mosquito bites, But just have a no more list and remind yourself that when Jesus comes back, when God finally does what he says he's going to do, which is put everything to right in the world, and when there's a new heaven and a new earth, finally, all the rules will change. And the things that make it hard for us to follow Christ will be no more. And it will be a beautiful, wonderful thing that John does his best to describe, but he just doesn't have all the words. And he just doesn't have all the right pictures. He does his best. But it's almost like what John wishes he could do is like, in the moment that he's having this vision, somehow grab you and I and say, look, you just got to look for yourself. I can't describe it. You just got to look. And so keep looking towards the Lamb. Continue to do what is right. Continue to do what is holy. Because one day God will come back and we will find ourselves back in the garden, just like it was always supposed to be.